Hello, everyone. Welcome to IT Tech Talk. I'm your host, Joel Ward, and with me today is Dr. Eric Cole. Eric, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure. I'm actually really excited about this.
It's my honor, and I'm super excited. I love talking about tech and cybersecurity.
Awesome. Eric, for my listeners, I've been hyping up this show for the last couple weeks about you coming on. I know my dad is actually really excited to hear you speak on my show. He's really interested. He's actually really excited to actually get your book as soon as it comes out. And actually, that's one of the questions we will dive into. I'm excited to get your book as soon as it comes out because, yes, I'm actually really excited to read that.
Subliminal messages.
Hey, no, I'll let you have that, dude. I'm really excited to read that. I'm actually, you've been hyping that up, and I'm actually really excited to look into it. I actually have it pre-ordered. So, yes. So, Eric, could you give my listeners a little background about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm sort of that rare breed of cybersecurity and entrepreneur. So I began my career at the CIA, where I was a professional hacker for 8 years. Really trained in how to find, exploit vulnerabilities in systems. And while I love working for the government, after working there for 8 years, I realized two things. One, being on the offense is boring because you always get in.
Yes.
Like there's always vulnerabilities, there's always exposures. So I wanted to switch to the defense. And I don't like working for other people, right? I like working for myself and building and starting and creating. I'm not a big maintainer. Like once something is built and maintained, I want to either leave like I did with the CIA, or what I learned is sell it to somebody else, get a multiplier, and then start again. So after I left the agency, I built a company with some partners, TSGI, the Cytex Group, Inc., and we sold out to Lockheed Martin. And normally when Lockheed Martin buys companies, they're really buying the contracts, and they tend to lay off a lot of the people. But in this case, Bob Stevens, who is the CEO and president of Lockheed Martin, was very concerned about cybersecurity, so he kept me on as his chief scientist for cybersecurity. So I was involved in everything from major breaches, like when the Chinese broke into the F-35, acquisitions, mergers, technology, patents. And I probably would have stayed for a couple more years, but then McAfee recruited me, where they were trying to revamp the entire technology line and ultimately sell the company. So I went to McAfee and rebuilt out the entire products, realigned with customer needs and what the industry really wanted. And we were sort of predicting 2 or 3 years ahead. And then we sold for multi-billion dollars to Intel. And then from there, I've been running my own company, Secure Anchor Consulting, really focused on helping organizations understand and build out strategy. And I believe everybody was put on the planet with a unique purpose. And my unique purpose is to make cyberspace a safe place to live, work, and raise a family. So that's what I try to do every minute of every day, is really just educate, work with people like you to really get the message out there on what we need to do to make cyberspace safe for everyone.
Oh, I totally agree with that. There's just so many vulnerabilities out there, and I'm sure you can agree with social media and stuff and attacks every day, especially when it comes to vulnerable old people. I get messages and emails all the time saying to give out my social all the time, and it's like people don't realize it's like that's a scam that happens on a daily, and they once they get in your system, they can have access to any little detail of your life.
Exactly. And what a lot of people don't realize, like folks like you and others that are technically savvy, they look at some of these messages or emails or social media tags and they laugh. But what I always tell them is, if it wasn't working, the attackers would stop doing it. So the fact that you keep seeing it over and over and over again means it's working, it's effective. And on average, these entities that do these mass social media scams, their goal is to target hundreds of thousands of people. And if they can get a 5% return, they're happy. Most of these scams, especially with COVID, because people are so paranoid, are getting about a 22 response rate in terms of, if you send it out to 100 people, 22 people are falling for it.
Yeah, like today, I actually use TurboTax for my taxes, and today I got an email saying, your TurboTax account was hacked. Please give us your information. And I'm like, the one way I know, I had a cybersecurity class way back when, and one of the things I learned was if the email looks kind of like off, if there's a little couple numbers or something, or it doesn't look legit, then it probably isn't legit. So that's one of the things I learned, and I try and do what you do is for friends. I'm like, if they say, hey, I got this email, do you know anything about it? And I'm like, well, check the email where it came from. If it says Netfu or Netflix or some kind of, it's spelled wrong, do not send them your information. And my mom, I try and coach her on that stuff too, because she's an older lady and she doesn't really understand that those things happen. And I try and make sure the generation behind me is understanding about that, because that stuff does happen. I am in the IT space. I have a lot of clients who are older and they just don't understand these emails, and so I try and give a understanding of what's going on. If Netflix would ask for stuff, they would ask for stuff, So I try and give an understanding, but I've been following your LinkedIn and stuff and seeing all your posts and just getting a baseline of what you do. And it's really interesting. Like, you've done so much in your life as far as cybersecurity, and it's fascinating. It really fascinates me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And one of the things I really try to focus on with my approach to cybersecurity is say yes instead of saying no. And what I mean by that is a lot of security people were trained up that when people are like, well, should we do Alexa? No. Should we click on emails? No. Should we? No. And the problem that I've learned is with a lot of folks, if you just tell them no, they're going to do it anyway. Yeah. So what I do is I like going to the next level. So this is actually advice I took from working with Bill Gates. I do the security for the Gates family. And one of the things you learn, if you're doing the security for Bill Gates and he wants to do something, you say yes, sir, and you figure out a way. You don't tell him no. So with him, he actually has multiple computers. He has one computer that he just does foundation stuff, one computer he just does Microsoft, one computer he just does personal, one computer he just does surfing with. Now, if you're as important and as rich as Bill Gates, you can go with 4 computers. But for most of my clients, I do a 2-computer approach. So what I do is, and this is for my mom too, because she's in her 70s, and you're right, that's a demographic that's targeted a lot, is use a non-Windows based computer for checking email and surfing the web. So I have an iPad and an iPhone. Every morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, I only check email 3 times a day, because otherwise it can be a distraction, and I always check on my non-Windows device. Now, if I get something that looks strange, looks suspicious, or I'm not sure where it could be legitimate, because I'll tell you, some of my clients, the way they communicate with me, it looks worse than the phishing attack. So I don't want to lose contracts because I'm too paranoid. So I open them up on a non-Windows iPad or iPhone, and if I get a weird message or a weird screen or something unusual, I just delete it. And then if it passes that test where it looks clean and legitimate, then when I get in my office and I sit in front of my Windows system to actually do work and put together contracts and reports for my clients, I only do that on my Windows system. So my big advice to listeners is just build a pattern, whether it's iPhone, Android, iPad, always check email and surf the web on a non-Windows device that does not have any critical information.
And that's awesome. I love how you use the non-Windows device. I actually use Windows all the time, and I'm not a big iPhone person. I have Android, so usually I check stuff on Android. I'm always on my phone checking stuff. Now, however, sometimes I do log into my Ubuntu that I have. I have a dual boot system. Now, as far as Ubuntu goes in Linux-based systems, is it a secure system to use? Like you were saying, non-based Windows systems. Is Ubuntu and Linux a secure system like Apple?
Yeah, so if we really break it down, whether you're looking at Windows, Apple, or variants of Linux, and we've tracked this for the last 7 years, if you look at the number of vulnerabilities per operating system, they're within 1% of each other. So this idea that like Apple is more secure than Windows or this or that, that's actually not technically correct, because they all have the same number of vulnerabilities. However, where it differentiates is, as we talked about, these attackers are not directly targeting people. They're going for the low-hanging fruit. They know that a certain number of people ordered from FedEx and have a FedEx shipment coming today. So they know if they send out a fish that says your FedEx order was delayed, click here, otherwise the package will be returned to the sender, they know a certain percent of people are going to go, oh, that must be my package, and click on it. So they're going after the low-hanging fruit. So if we look at the raw numbers, approximately 90% of the population are using Windows-based systems. 6% are using Apple and about 3% are using variants of Linux. So if we're really looking at the way adversaries are working today, if you're using a non-Windows-based system, the probability of being malicious are much lower. So actually using Ubuntu or a Linux is actually even lower because it's only a 3% versus the 6% with Apple. So it's actually a much lower chance. Now, what I always tell folks is, if everyone listens to my advice and everyone starts using iPads and iPhones, then the adversary is going to adapt and adjust, and we're going to see a lot more attacks for that platform. But at least right now, today, using Android, Apple, or Linux variants is going to be much, much safer, not because it's more secure, but because it's a much lower install base and there's a lot less malware that runs on those platforms.
Yeah, and actually, I use Android all the time. It's something because I like customization, and one of the things that I like about Linux and Ubuntu is I can customize it and do things with it, because I also am a web developer, so it kind of really works in my favor. But recently, I have been using Windows a lot more, especially for my podcast and just using it for work, because it seems like I can actually install programs with no problem. Now, here's the thing, like you were saying, I don't install, when I install, if there's like programs that I download from the web, if I see a little pop-up, I'm like, ooh, I'm not downloading it. So when I go to Linux systems, and I've actually had this happen recently, where I was downloading a Linux file, and the Linux file popped up something. It sent me to another page, which popped up with another page, and I'm just like, let me go back and click the US download versus the European download, because the European download just sent me to another page where a pop-up happened. So I actually have stuff installed on my computer, like virus software and stuff, but I don't use, the one thing I don't use is Norton. I know there's a lot of controversy from locals in my area about Norton. Is that one of the things that you've heard, or is it something you attest to? Like, as far as like, is Norton something people should be trusting as far as like virus protection?
Yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, the safety of your computer is going to come down to the safety of the operator. What I always tell folks is, you can take the safest car on the planet. I can give you an automobile that has all the airbags and anti-lock brakes and everything else. But if you're an unsafe driver, you can still drive at 100 miles an hour into a tree and hurt or kill yourself. And it's the same thing with the computer. Is the endpoint security will catch a lot of the basic stuff, but it really comes down to just being a safe driver and not going to any unknown sites, not clicking links, not opening up attachments. Now, I'm a fan of endpoint security, but to me what it comes down to is people always like going after one of them. Like for a while it was, Kaspersky can't be trusted because it's Russian, and Trend Micro can't be trusted because that was overseas, and then recently it was Norton can't because of the whole Symantec acquisition, and there's always things with McAfee and good old John McAfee getting himself into trouble here and there. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, they're all equal in terms of the general level of protection. Now, I know the vendors just freaked out when I said that, but they're all pretty much comparable. So I always tell folks, if you don't like Norton, that's fine. Go with whatever one you feel comfortable with, but make sure you go with the full endpoint security, about the $79. You don't want to go with the $39 or $49. That's just AV, about the $79 package. Make sure it's licensed. Make sure it's turned on. And make sure that you get the updates on a regular basis. So if you don't like Norton, great. That's fine. Use one of the other vendors. But you want to have some level of protection on those systems.
Now, like you were just saying, even though if they get that protection, it's not guaranteed that it will protect from everything, correct?
Absolutely, because remember, the attackers that are trying to break into your system, they have all the products on their system. They know how the products work. They know how they operate. They know how they function. So a lot of the newer malware is actually designed to bypass and get around a lot of the different endpoint security products that are out there. Now, the good news is, and I'm a person that always tries to look for the positive. So I always caveat this because I know it's a sensitive subject when we talk about the epidemic. I know that there was a lot of hardship. I know that a lot of people lost loved ones. A lot of people lost jobs. I'm not trying to downplay that at all, but I always try to say, okay, when something really bad on the surface happens, how can we look for the good? And the good is, because so many people had to quickly work from home and use home systems, a lot of them were outdated systems that weren't patched, that didn't have endpoint security. So the sophistication of the adversary over the last 12 months has actually decreased significantly because of that, which means if you're running Windows 10 or a supported operating system fully patched with endpoint security, most of the malware we're seeing right now today isn't going to be effective, and it is going to be stopped because of that factor. Now, that's today, right? In a year when people start cleaning up those sloppy systems and everyone starts doing that, you're going to see the sophistication rise up again. But at least for the short term, if you're having up-to-date, fully patched endpoint security and you're a little careful in what you do and what you click on, that's going to go a long way to keep you protected and safe.
Okay. Yeah, so, I agree with you. I'm one of those people who also believes that, there's good in the bad. And I really do believe that there's been a lot of things that have happened. I actually lost my grandma recently. And it wasn't due to COVID, but it was just, natural. But it was still like I saw the good in it. And there's been a lot of good that's come out of it. And so, seeing that. But you're right. There has been a lot of people who have worked from home. And I've actually, because I do some IT work, have had to help set up Ethernet cables and how their routers work and stuff. So it's like, and I actually recently had a client, it was about, I would say the middle of when COVID was really going on, come to me and ask me why she had some weird activity on her router. What was because her ex-husband was having the Comcast. He had a friend at Comcast was hacking into her router, and so it's like all this stuff. I'm not a big cybersecurity guy. I've never really. I'm still actually going through a class that Cisco. I think it was the Cisco class. I actually haven't had a chance to do recently, but I was doing some classes with Cisco and stuff. But there's like, she was having these attacks on her router, and I was like, I noticed it, and I told her, I was like, well, it's coming from this computer and all this IP address. She's like, that's my ex-husband's IP address. And I was like, well, your ex-husband is hacking into you. So she was thankful, and she paid me for my time, and I got that taken care of, and I actually worked with Comcast to get the employees removed because of his involvement. But it was a whole big downplay. But, it's one of those things that's like vulnerabilities happen regardless. You can have the best router with the best protection with everything, and it's gonna happen. But like you said, right now it's in a decline, but in a year, who knows? The vulnerabilities could come back, and it's it's constantly, it keeps you in business at least. So I'd like to dive into a question. You actually, we talked before the show started, you actually were commissioned by the President Obama to work with him. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was one of the commissioners on cybersecurity to help put together the strategy and make sure that key items and aspects of the White House were properly secure and protected.
Awesome. So what did that entail? So you basically you came in as a contractor kind of deal?
Exactly, as a contractor advisor, and really just helping them understand cybersecurity. To me, probably the biggest lesson learned, and it's a great lesson for everyone, is you need to understand a problem so well and the solution that you can explain it to a non-technical person in 2.5 minutes. Because the way it works, if you're and I've worked with most of the presidents over the last 20 years and briefed them, and in most of them, the first thing you ask when you're waiting is, how much time do I have? And the answer is going to usually be anywhere between 1.5 minutes to 3 minutes if you're real lucky. So I plan in the car, but then I adjust because you don't find out how much time you have until you show up. And then literally they say go. You have your 90 seconds or 120 seconds to basically explain the point. And then if you've done a good job, and this is always if you've done a good job, they will ask 1 or 2 follow-up questions. And those answers have to be 20 seconds. And if you've done an amazing job, they'll ask more than 3 questions. So if you get done and they say thank you and you get walked out, it's like, okay, you fumbled the football on that one, because clearly you didn't get them the information they wanted, because if they didn't understood it, they would have asked for follow-up questions. So it really teaches you how to make sure that you're very clear, focused, and aligned. And that skill has helped me a lot with executives where when you go in any business, it's all about convincing them that you have the right products or solutions. So I can, within 120 seconds, essentially sell executives on our services, and that has fared well. Where many companies want to do 2 to 3 hour presentations with follow-up meetings, our sales cycle is very quick because of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I have the same issue just doing IT work, because it's like if I have an older person and their computer is not working and they're like, well, can you tell me what's wrong with it? And you try and explain it in a technical term and they're like not understanding. You have to dumb it down. You have to explain it slowly and patiently, just so they can understand that way, that they're not confused. So like I recently had someone who was asking me why their printer wasn't working. They said, I've done all this, I've done that. And I was like, well, I explained it in a way that, well, the software got uninstalled and it just needs to reinstall, and was good. And it worked. And it's you have to explain, well, like you said, and I couldn't imagine having that short a time to explain something. That's too short time for me. I'd be like, this is not going to work. So, yeah, I can't explain it in that short time. So perks to you for being able to explain something to a president, especially who has a busy schedule already. So yeah, that's awesome. So I want to ask you a little bit more about your company. It's Secure Anchor, correct?
Yes, Secure Anchor Consulting, yes.
Yes. So what do you're basically a consulting firm that consults on cybersecurity for high value companies, correct? Or even like, do you do high value and do you do moderate companies, or do you just do high value?
Well, it's really across the board. I mean, we have clients that are small, medium, and large. Mm-hmm. What it really comes down to is organizations that are unique or different and struggle with mm-hmm. integrating security into their solutions. So a couple of the philosophies: I believe that if cybersecurity is done correctly, it should be a business enabler.
Okay.
We talked about never saying no. When I finish a cybersecurity project, your business should be better, faster, and make more revenue than before I came in. So it's sort of a mind shift than a lot of traditional folks. I also mm-hmm. believe that cybersecurity is not cookie cutter, that one size doesn't fit all, that you need to really understand the business and understand what they're doing and then customize a response. And then the third real big differentiator, and this has been a shift in my company in the last 5 years, is I believe one of the reasons why organizations struggle with cybersecurity is because they don't have proper cybersecurity strategy and leadership. What has happened in our industry is the CISO role, the Chief Information Security Officer mm-hmm. role, has basically become a technical career path. That if you work in cybersecurity for 12 mm-hmm. years and you're a world-class security engineer, then the company promotes you to CISO so they don't leave the organization. And to me, that's not correct. Mm-hmm. Now, world-class security engineers can become world-class CISOs if they mind shift, mm-hmm. but it's a completely different mindset in terms of how you think and understand the business. It's not going in and thinking geek and technical and false positives. It's all about mm-hmm. enabling the business to be successful. And to me, I'll give you and everyone the CISO quiz. If you're CISO material, here's the CISO quiz. You're sitting at your desk, and all of a sudden you get a text that one of your key servers has been hacked. All of a sudden, critical data is being leaked to foreign entities, and the FBI is calling you on the phone. What do you do? Now, if your answer is, I quickly run into the data center, or if you're working remote, I quickly log into the servers, I check and verify the servers, I validate the logs, I confirm what's going on, and I start to do immediate triage. Congratulations. You are a world-class security engineer. However, if your answer was, I immediately gather my team, I task my team to start going in and looking at different aspects, I tell them they need to report back to me with specific deliverables in 45 minutes, I call up the CEO, I tell them we do have a hack, and I will give them an update in 60 minutes, you're a world-class CISO. So notice the difference. One was technical focused on mm-hmm. rolling up your sleeves and jumping into the water, and the other one was stepping back, organizing the team's strategic strategy, and notifying the executives. That's the difference between a world-class CISO and a world-class security engineer. And to me, a lot of times, people get so caught up in titles that you have people that want to be world-class security engineers. That's their purpose, mm-hmm. but they feel they want the CISO title. So they actually become a CISO. They're miserable, the executives are miserable, and everyone's miserable because they're not positioned for that job and they're not thinking the way they need to think.
Yeah, and I actually am glad you kind of put that out there, because there's a lot of people out there who probably who are in IT, who are in that role as well, and they're like, well, I've had this happen, and I don't consider myself world class. I consider myself mediocre, but I still handled the problem. So for those, we're getting close to our time, but I want to jump into a couple more questions before we go. If we run over, I guess we'll deal with that. But as far as being a CISO. What are some of the things that people can do to better help themselves in that role? Especially if they're new to the role, what can they better do to help get themselves ready for that role if they're just jumping into it as far as moving from a different position?
What it really comes down to is understanding business, understanding the language of business, which is all money. So if you don't know how to read a balance statement, if you don't know how to read a profit and loss statement, if you don't understand, you don't have to create them. You just have to understand basic financials. That's something you definitely want to start looking at, reading some books or taking some free courses on business, but just really understanding the business mindset, because that's what a CISO is all about. And the area and the way to do that is don't be afraid to ask for help. Most people are like, I had a friend who's like, Eric, I want to be a CISO. I said, great, what do you want to be a CISO for? He goes, healthcare organizations. I'm like, great, contact the CISO and the CFO at the biggest healthcare organizations in the world and ask them if they would do a 30-minute conversation. And he's like, Eric, they won't talk to me. I'm like, you're right. If you don't reach out to them, they won't talk to you. But you would be amazed if you email them with a very specific, unique question that they will actually get back to you and be responsive. Most people want to help others, but nobody ever asks, so they never go in and follow through. Real quick, my favorite example on this is my Richard Branson story. I talk to Richard Branson usually about once or twice a year, and the way we built a relationship was about 4 years ago, I wanted to build multiple business lines at the same time. And everyone told me, Eric, single focus. You do one thing, one thing, one thing. And Richard Branson, when he built the Virgin brand, he built record stores and gyms and everything simultaneously. So I found his email and I emailed him and I said, Richard, I know you're real busy, but I have a very specific question. I want to build out multiple large product lines at the same time, but everyone is telling me to only focus on one. I noticed that you built out 4 different product lines with Virgin. I was wondering if you had any advice for me. 17 days later, I get an email that says, what's your phone number? I'm free for the next 30 minutes, from Richard Branson.
Whoa.
Now, from his email address. Now, I'm thinking, my friends are punking me. I'm like, this is not good. So I'm like, what do I have to lose? So I send back my phone number, and my phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's Richard Branson, and we talk for 30 minutes, and he gives me some great advice.
Wow.
And at the end, I said, Richard, I know you're busy. I have to answer one question. Why did you reply to my email? I'm sure you get bombarded. He goes, Eric, I get thousands of emails a day with stupid requests. Like, can you give me money? Can you be the father of my children? Like, just ridiculous things. He goes, I get very few emails that are asking specific questions for help. He goes, last week, you were the only legitimate email where somebody, they did their research, they understood my business, and they had a genuine question. And he goes, those I will always respond to. And we had a great talk. And like I said, I periodically reach out to him once or twice a year, and he always responds back. But that's what most people don't realize. People will help you if you are sincere and ask them, but don't be afraid to ask for help and grow and understand your business knowledge if you want to become a CISO.
I like that. And actually, playing off of that, one of my friends who has a podcast actually had someone on a show who recently just said something exactly along those lines, where if you don't reach out and you don't ask a question and ask for help, they're not going to reach out to you. You can't expect them to just come to you. You have to reach out. So I love how you said that, because I'm like, wow, that was just on the episode I just listened to on my buddy's podcast. That actually really makes me happy. So hey, Eric, I know we're actually running short on time, but we're going to run a little bit over if that's all right with you. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about your book that you're getting ready to launch here in May.
So this is actually pre-release copy, right? But it's real. The hard part, So Cyber Crisis comes out in May. So essentially, this is my 7th book.
Oh, wow.
And I made a shift once again about 3 or 4 years ago. All my previous books were technical focused. So my first book was Hackers Beware, very technical. My next book was Advanced Persistent Threat, very technical, Hiding in Plain Sight, Network Security Bible, all technical, because what I felt that the problem was, and I think I was right 15 years ago, is not enough people understood cybersecurity to help organizations from a technical perspective. But I feel today that is not a problem. I mean, we always need more people, but I believe there's lots of great training, there's lots of good programs, there's lots of good entities out there that can train up technical people. But what I realized many years ago is there's nobody that can speak and understand business, and there's no book that explains to executives the real dangers of cybersecurity. Most executives watch news or read newspapers, and the problem with that is they only cover major breaches. So if you just looked at the media, you would think that there's one breach every 2 years, and other than that, there's no issues. When in reality, most organizations are compromised for 3 years, and nobody knows about it. So Cyber Crisis is really written for business folks, managers, directors, people that want to understand what's really happening with cybersecurity, the real threats, and strategic business level things they can do to secure and protect their organization. And one thing I did is not only write it with that audience, but I have a lot of CEOs of big companies that have reviewed, read, and commented to make sure it really speaks the language and meets for them. So yeah, this is really meant to me fill that gap to help business executives and decision makers understand the real threats and implement security into their decision-making process.
I like that. I really do. Because my dad actually is the CEO of his of a dairy laboratory, and he has been doing that for about almost 30 years now. And he has a big network where he basically puts clients' data on the computer for them to read, and like on he has a giant server system. So he's, I don't know the logistics of everything, but I'm sure that he's had vulnerabilities, and he has a whole IT team that works locally, that like a big team that actually works on the servers and everything daily. So I'm sure that he'll listen to this and be like, oh, I should reach out to this guy because I might have some vulnerabilities. But I really do agree with you on that. Is as far as like it shouldn't just be for like the CEOs and stuff. It should be for everybody, because there's a lot of people in lower class business who have had, like you said, vulnerabilities, and they need that kind of stuff. So I definitely am looking forward to reading this and passing on to anybody who I know in the entrepreneur scene who actually needs this kind of information. Which, speaking of entrepreneurship, is there? Let's talk a little bit about that. You said you are a different kind of entrepreneur. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of the entrepreneurs that I see are really focused on business. They have MBAs. They understand business. They'll find an area that they think is ripe or they can make a lot of money, and they'll hire technical experts, but they're not actually technical experts. They don't really understand and know that area. Over time, they naturally do because they're around it, but they really aren't the technical experts. So to me, I'm the technical experts. I built out the products. I built out the components. I write the books. And then I went in and started my own company, because I believe that anyone that's really smart should actually work for themselves. Because in so many of these large companies, and I've seen this happen over and over again, you have these really brilliant people that create all the intellectual property. They drive all the revenue. They're the reasons why customers come to the organization, and they're making maybe 2% of the overall revenue, if that. And these executives and CEOs are making 40, 50, 60%. And it always boggles my mind is, why do you have the brilliant person that created the intellectual property making $300K a year, and somebody that just identified this space was ripe and hired that person is making $4 or $5 million a year? So I'm a big fan that anybody can be an entrepreneur. All cybersecurity people should start their own business. Now, I know not everyone wants to, and not everyone has those dreams, which is okay. But I believe that everyone has that potential and should, at least in some point in their life, tap into and ask themselves that question. Now, if they decide they don't want to, that's okay, but they should at least say, what is the value and benefit versus the risk of me starting my own company? And that's why one of the ones, just to show you how committed I am, and to me it's not about the money, is I used to have vCISO, which is CISO virtualization, as part of my organization offering, and I felt that keeping it to myself was a disservice. So now I actually train people so they can start their own vCISO businesses and actually be their own boss, grow their own company, and be able to do that. So that's the other area with cybersecurity strategy that I'm focused on with CISOs, is training people up so they can run their own business offering CISO services.
Is that what you do with Secure Anchor kind of as well? Is that kind of like a side thing for Secure Anchor, or is that just something you do personally?
So that's actually one of our new lines of business, because before COVID, most of our business was in-person, on-site assessments. And of course, with COVID, where security was put on the back burner and nobody was in the office, that sort of dried up a lot of the opportunities. But once again, it's all about looking for new opportunities. Most of the large companies you know about, like FedEx and many others, they were started during the Depression. They were started when most companies were going out of business. So to me, I identified CISO as sort of a blue ocean area, and I started putting together CISO certification, CISO training, and CISO advisory, and that business has just sort of exploded over the last 6 or 7 months. So I'm sort of one of those, like I said, nothing against any of the hardship of COVID, but to me, COVID was the best thing that ever happened to my business. Because if it didn't happen, I'd probably still be doing the assessments, which I liked, but what I really love is helping people and building out the CISO cert.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Eric, we are past our time, but thank you so much for jumping on my show with me. It has been an honor to get to talk to you and have a conversation about cybersecurity and get to know more about you. For all you listeners out there, tune in a couple of days. We have some more guests coming on. I'm really excited for these guests. I'm really excited that we get to continue the show. Please stay safe out there. So thank you all for joining me. It should be...